"Marry me," she said at 2 in the morning, sitting on my tailgate in the diner lot, holding a coffee she hadn't touched. I let out a short, dry laugh. "Sure, right after I win the lottery. I'm serious, Rhett. 90 days on paper, then we're done. But I need a husband by Friday, or I lose everything. And you're the only man alive I trust." Casey wiped her eyes, furious about the tears. 12 years she'd been my best friend. 12 years I'd loved her in silence. Now she wanted to marry me for 90 days, completely unaware why. Welcome back to the channel. If you love stories of honest working men, quiet devotion, and the unexpected ways true love finally finds its voice, please hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Leave a comment below letting us know where in the world you are listening from tonight. We read and appreciate every single story shared across the globe. Now, grab a warm drink, pull up a chair, and let us begin. My name is Rhett Callahan. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a third-generation electrician. My grandfather wired half the old craftsman homes in this county back when tungsten bulbs were considered cutting-edge technology. My dad took over after him, pulling heavy copper wire through damp crawl spaces and drafty attics, and now the business rests squarely on my shoulders. I run a single-man operation out of a battered white Ford F-150, with Callahan Electrical Services hand-painted in faded blue lettering on the driver's door. I fix what's broken, I never overcharge a widow, and I know the internal anatomy of every vintage home in the valley, right down to the dangerously frayed cloth-wrapped knob and tube wiring. It isn't a high-status trade that makes people at dinner parties lean in closer, but I've never once had to wonder if my work mattered. You flip a wall switch, the current completes its circuit, and the room floods with light. A man could do far worse with his life. Casey Booker cuts hair down at the main attraction on Main Street, and she's easily the finest stylist in the county. Retired ladies book her chair 3 weeks in advance just to listen to her quick wit and have Casey tell them they look 15 years younger. She's loud, quick to laugh, cries openly at dog food commercials, and would strip off her heaviest canvas coat in the middle of a blizzard to give it to a stranger stranded on the roadside. She's been my absolute best friend since we were 15 years old. I can pinpoint the exact December night I fell irrevocably in love with her because I've carried it in my chest for 17 years without ever breathing a single word aloud. We were 17. Her high school boyfriend, some forgettable varsity baseball player who thought he owned the world, stood her up for the junior formal. I found her sitting alone on the lowered tailgate of my dad's pickup in the frosted back parking lot of the school. She was wearing a floor-length emerald green dress, shiver shaking in the 19-degree December air, fighting like hell not to let a single tear spill over her lashes. I didn't say anything grand or clever. I simply pulled off my heavy canvas work coat, draped it over her trembling shoulders, and sat beside her on the cold steel bed in complete silence while the red taillights of everybody else's cars filed out of the lot into the winter fog. Casey leaned her head lightly against my shoulder, closed her eyes, and whispered, "You're the only boy in this entire town who's never once let me down, Rhett Callahan." My chest caught fire right then and there. Say it, my mind screamed at me. Say it right now before it's too late. I didn't. I drove her home in silence, walked her to the porch like the dependable neighbor boy I'd always been, said goodnight, and let the moment slip into the dark. That's the silent trap of being overly cautious. You convince yourself there'll always be a better, safer time down the road, and then 17 full years pass you by while you watch life happen from the sidelines. Sitting on that exact same truck tailgate at 2 o'clock on a cold, rainy Tuesday morning outside the Starlight Diner, Casey finally laid out why she desperately needed a legally binding husband by Friday afternoon. Casey had been raised by her maternal grandmother, Ruth and Booker Gran, on a white wood frame farmhouse out on Hollis Road that had belonged to the Booker family for 4 generations. Casey's mother had skipped town before Casey was 3. Her father was never more than a ghost on a birth certificate, and Gran was the unshakable rock who had raised her. Gran had passed away 8 agonizing months ago, and that was when the legal nightmare officially began. "My Uncle Dale," Casey said, her hazel eyes fixed blankly on the rain streaming down my windshield. The son who moved up to Chicago 30 years ago showed up to Gran's memorial service in a $2,000 suit, and left before the funeral dishes were washed. What about Dale? I asked, my voice dropping. Turns out Gran was old-fashioned to a fault. Casey's voice cracked slightly. Her land trust splits the 40-acre farm right down the middle between us. But there's an archaic condition clause attached to the deed. Gran didn't believe a single woman could maintain a working homestead alone. In the legal document, she leaves me my 20 acres free and clear only if I am settled and legally married within exactly 1 year of her passing. Otherwise, my entire half defaults directly to Dale. Case, that's barbaric, I said, my knuckles turning white as my grip tightened on the steering wheel. It's an outdated clause. You can contest that in probate court. My estate attorney checked every precedent, she whispered, her voice trembling. A property owner can legally attach conditional stipulations to land transfers. And Dale's already got a commercial real estate developer standing by with cash in hand. They want to tear down Gran's house, clear the timber, and put up 40 suburban tract homes. She wiped a rogue tear from her cheek with the cuff of her sweater. The 1-year deadline hits in 91 days. If I'm not legally married by Friday at 5 o'clock, my half defaults directly to Dale. So marry somebody, I forced out through a tight throat, every word costing me a piece of my soul. You've dated half the eligible men in this county. Pick one and sign the papers. I don't love a single one of them, Rhett, and I refuse to trap an innocent man in a binding marriage just to preserve real estate. That's a lie that ruins 2 lives. She reached across the truck console, her cold, trembling fingers sliding over mine. But you're my best friend, she whispered softly. We already know it's not real. 90 days on paper. We file the marriage certificate. I protect Gran's house from the bulldozers, and then we quiet file for a low-key annulment. Nobody gets hurt because nobody's pretending to feel something they don't. Nobody's pretending to feel something they don't. She had no idea. 12 long years of shared morning coffees, late-night emergency calls, and watching her date the wrong men. And she didn't have the slightest clue I had been irrevocably, hopelessly in love with her since high school. Okay, I heard myself say. What choice did I really have? Stand by and watch her lose her grandmother's house to a greedy uncle? Okay, but if we do this, Uncle Dale will have his aggressive corporate lawyers looking for a sham. The clause explicitly states settled and married. That means cohabitation. We live under the same roof, share an address, and sell this marriage convincingly to the entire county. Casey stared at me in stunned silence, then threw her arms around my neck across the console. I held her while she sobbed out 8 months of bottled-up terror against my shoulder. I looked through the rain-streaked windshield into the dark, empty diner lot and thought, Rhett Callahan, you absolute fool. You just agreed to marry the woman you've loved half your life and pretend it's all a cold business transaction for 90 days. We were married 3 days later on an overcast, chilly Friday at the county municipal building. Casey wore a simple knee-length yellow sundress that made her look like autumn sunshine, and I wore my cleanest navy button-down shirt, the one without my name embroidered over the breast pocket. Her cousin Bree came along as our official witness. The justice of the peace droned through the civil vows in a flat, bureaucratic monotone. I slid a simple gold band onto Casey's finger, and her hand shook visibly as she slid a matching band onto mine. When Judge Miller concluded with, "You may now kiss the bride," both of us froze like deer caught in high beams. Casey grabbed my lapels with a performance-ready laugh, pulling my face down to press her warm, soft lips against mine. "For the court record," she whispered against my cheek, her breath sweet and warm. I forced a tight smile for Bree's phone camera, but deep inside my chest, that quick kiss didn't feel like legal paperwork at all. It felt like breathing pure oxygen after 20 minutes underwater. That evening, I backed my F-150 up to the wooden front porch of the farmhouse and unloaded my canvas duffel bags and toolboxes. Moving into Gran's old house meant my daily life was instantly filled with sensory details I had spent 12 years ruthlessly suppressing. Waking up at dawn to the sound of Gran's copper kettle whistling in the kitchen, finding Casey at the wooden counter in an oversized sweatshirt with her hair pulled into a messy bun, and falling asleep in the ground floor guest room to the soft sound of her floorboards creaking directly overhead. The farmhouse had suffered from decades of quiet, elder neglect. Since I'm a licensed electrician, I spent my weekday evenings dragging out old cloth-wrapped wiring from the attic, replacing corroded junction boxes, and stringing modern grounded copper lines throughout the entire structure, charging her not a single cent. One warm, humid Tuesday night in mid-June, I was standing on a stepladder in the narrow hallway wiring a new overhead junction box. Casey walked out of the kitchen, leaning against the doorframe holding 2 cold glass bottles of root beer. "Gran always told me you'd make somebody an exceptional husband, Rhett," she said quietly, handing a bottle up to me. "That Callahan boy has steady hands and a steady heart." She'd think this whole setup was completely hilarious. Us signed up as man and wife just to outsmart Dale's high-priced Chicago lawyer. "She'd be right," I said, the words slipping past my brain before my tongue could filter them. Casey went completely still in the doorway. "What's that supposed to mean?" I caught myself instantly, keeping my eyes fixed rigidly on the copper wire leads inside the box. "It means old houses need updated breaker panels, Case. Hand me those needle-nose wire strippers on the stool, would you?" She handed me the tool in total silence, standing at the base of that ladder for 20 long minutes, leaving an unspoken, electric question hanging in the humid air between us like heavy summer storm clouds. The undeniable turning point came during our 4th week under the same roof. A violent summer thunderstorm rolled through the valley, knocking down a massive oak limb across the main utility feeder lines along Hollis Road. The power vanished in a single instant, plunging the farmhouse into total blackness. I checked the damp, earthen basement with my heavy mag light flashlight to confirm the main breaker hadn't blown before coming back up to the kitchen. Casey was sitting cross-legged on the wide pine floorboards with 2 thick pillar candles set inside glass mason jars, listening to the torrential rain hammer against the tin roof overhead. "The house's internal system is fine," I said, setting my flashlight on the counter. "Main line down up the road. The power company won't have a bucket truck out here until well after daybreak." I sat on the floor opposite her, resting my back against the lower cabinets. The warm amber candlelight flickered against the vintage floral wallpaper, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Casey pulled her knees up to her chest, resting her chin on her arms, and began talking about growing up in the old house. Gran teaching her how to roll out buttermilk biscuit dough on the flour-dusted counter, her grandfather calling her little bit, and the lingering sting of a mother who walked out on a rainy Tuesday and never returned. Gran made this place feel like an unshakable fortress, Casey whispered, her eyes staring deeply into the yellow candle flame. But after she died, every room felt like a museum. Cold furniture, empty corridors, and quiet corners. She turned her head slowly, her hazel eyes catching the golden firelight. "This past month is the first time since Gran's funeral that this house feels like a home again, because somebody else is breathing in the hallway. Because it's you, Rhett." The physical space between us on the wide pine floor felt impossibly small. I wanted so desperately to reach out, take her face in my hands, and tell her everything. Yet I was terrified of shattering the delicate peace we had built. "Case," I said, my voice dropping into a rough, low register. "Yeah, Rhett?" she whispered, holding my gaze without blinking. Before I could force the words out of my throat, a sharp, mechanical thrum echoed through the walls. Utility power restored unexpectedly. The overhead fluorescent fixture burst into blinding white light, instantly erasing every warm shadow in the room. The spell snapped clean in half. We both let out an abrupt, awkward laugh and pushed ourselves up off the cold floor. "Breaker held up fine?" I muttered, clearing my throat and looking at the ceiling fixture. "That's good." "Yeah," Casey said quietly, blowing out the 2 mason jar candles. "That's real good." I walked down to my room on the main floor, laid in the dark, and realized the terrifying reality. 90 days was never going to be long enough, and it was also going to be way, way too long. The inevitable confrontation came on a muggy Saturday afternoon, when a late model luxury sedan pulled into the gravel driveway with a loud crunch. Uncle Dale Booker stepped out wearing a tailored navy blazer, tucked a thick leather folder under his arm, and pushed open the front screen door without bothering to knock. I was on a wooden stepladder near the pantry replacing a hallway light fixture. Casey was sitting at the kitchen table organizing salon receipts and tax forms. Well, Dale said, his voice dripping with patronizing, theatrical sarcasm. The happy newlyweds. When your corporate lawyer filed the marriage certificate with probate, I honestly thought it was a clerical joke. Casey stood up from the table instantly. You're trespassing on private property, Dale. I own 50% of this dirt until probate officially signs off. Dale countered smoothly, walking around the wooden table. He sneered up at me on the ladder. A real blue-collar romance. The local hairdresser marries her neighborhood handyman. Do you honestly believe a circuit court judge won't see this for the desperate, transparent maneuver it actually is? He stepped closer to the base of my ladder, dropping his voice into a vicious whisper. Do you even know what she's using you for, son? You're a temporary signature on an affidavit. 90 days from now, she'll file for dissolution, drop you back in your trailer, and keep the real estate. Every single word he spoke was technically accurate to our original blueprint. But hearing him use our sacred secret as a weapon to make Casey feel small and deceptive in her own grandmother's kitchen made something deep inside my chest snap in two. I set my pliers down deliberately on the top tray, climbed off the ladder, and stepped directly into Uncle Dale's personal space, towering over him and blocking his line of sight to Casey. Let me educate you on exactly what you're looking at, Dale, I said, my voice low, gravelly, and shaking with quiet rage. You're looking at a man who has been completely, helplessly in love with your niece since the 10th grade. A man who was too damn foolish to speak up years ago, who would have married her for real 10 years back if he thought a woman like her would ever take a chance on an electrician. I poked a hard, calloused finger directly against his expensive wool lapel. Call it a scheme all you want. But I am rewiring this house with my own 2 hands for a woman I would lay down my life to protect. Go ahead and drag us into open court, Dale. I will sit on that witness stand, look the judge in the eye, and testify under oath exactly how I feel about my wife. The kitchen fell dead silent. The only sound was the steady tick of the wall clock. Dale's face flushed a deep, mottled purple. He snatched his leather folder, backed rapidly toward the screen door and spat. We'll see what the probate court says about this, Callahan. He slammed the screen door and tore down the driveway, sending white gravel flying into the lawn. I turned around slowly. Casey was standing by the kitchen table, her hands resting on the back of a chair, staring at me with terrifying, unblinking intensity. Rhett, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What did you just say? I had to make it sound believable to him, Case. I lied quickly, my heart hammering like a trapped bird against my ribs. He needed to hear something raw and emotional so he'd back off. Casey didn't move an inch. Since the 10th grade? You said, 10 years back. You said you would have married me for real. Rhett, that isn't laying it on thick for an uncle. Those are exceptionally specific details for a fake story. I took a slow, heavy breath and looked her straight in the eye. I have a massive problem, Casey. The original plan was 90 days, paper only. But I already had the feelings when I signed my name at the courthouse last Friday. I've had them since we were 17 sitting in the cold on my truck tailgate. I never said a word because I preferred having you as my best friend for 50 years over risking losing you forever. So now you know. And if this ruins everything between us, I'll pack my bags and move back to my town apartment tonight. Casey didn't answer. She turned on her heel and walked silently upstairs to her bedroom, shutting the door behind her. I stood alone in the quiet kitchen, grabbed my canvas duffel bag from the guest room, and walked toward the front porch. But Casey was waiting on the porch steps, her eyes red-rimmed and her face furious. You don't get to lay 17 years of emotional explosives on my kitchen floor and then just drive away. Rhett Callahan, she shouted at me. Case, I'm trying to give you space to process. 17 years, she cried, stepping forward and striking my chest with her open hand. You watched me date every wrong guy in this county. You held my hand through 2 catastrophic breakups. You pulled my car out of Miller's Creek in the middle of winter, and you never said a single damn word. I was trying to protect our friendship. I yelled back, my own composure breaking. Do you have any idea? She cried, heavy tears finally spilling over her lashes. How many nights I sat in my bedroom telling myself I was insane for feeling what I felt about you. Telling myself Rhett Callahan only saw me as his goofy childhood friend. And that I wasn't going to be the pathetic girl who ruined everything by. She choked on her breath, pressing her palms to her face. By wanting more. The front porch went dead quiet. The afternoon breeze rustled through the oak trees. What did you just say? I whispered, my duffel bag slipping from my hand. Casey wiped her eyes angrily with her sleeve. I said we have been sitting in opposite corners of the exact same room for 17 years doing the exact same stupid thing. I dropped my bag onto the porch floorboards, reached out, pulled her against my chest, and buried my face in her hair. The 17-year wall collapsed into dust between us. When I tipped her chin up and kissed her, it was deep, real, and desperate. 17 years of patient, quiet devotion finally finding its home. Now our marriage was real in every sense of the word, but Uncle Dale didn't know that. 2 weeks later, he returned with a completely different strategy. He had tried offering Casey a cashier's check at the salon to buy out her half of the property, but she had torn it clean in half in front of her clients. Hollis Road was where her grandparents had farmed and lived, not a liquid asset to be liquidated for suburban sprawl. So Dale played his final card privately against me. Late Thursday afternoon, I was leaning into the back of my white service truck near the barn grabbing a roll of electrical tape, when Dale stepped out from behind his luxury sedan, holding a black leather briefcase. He pulled out a fresh, certified cashier's check made out directly to Rhett Callahan for $60,000. I offered my niece a generous payout and she was too foolishly sentimental to take it, Dale said smoothly, twirling a golden pen. So now I'm offering it directly to you. $60,000 cash, cleared instantly upon endorsement. What's the catch, Dale? I asked, keeping my hands on my truck bumper. No catch, just timing. Dale smiled sneeringly. The probate deadline hits in 21 days. All you have to do is let the clock run out. Don't renew your cohabitation filing. Pick an argument, pack your canvas bags, and move back to your town apartment for 7 days. Under paragraph 3 of the land trust, her half defaults to me automatically. She assumes the marriage simply didn't work out, and you walk away with more cash than a blue-collar electrician makes in 2 years. An electrician making $48,000 a year working 60-hour weeks was being offered $60,000 in clean cash just to step back for 1 week. I looked at the cashier's check, then met his cold, greedy eyes. I knew right then exactly what I had to do. The final month of those 90 days was the finest, most breathtaking season of my existence. I told Casey I loved her every single morning before she opened her eyes. 3 weeks before the probate deadline, on a crisp, golden October evening, I took her by the hand and walked her out to the back pasture beneath the wide canopy of the ancient oak tree where her grandfather was buried. I reached deep into my coat pocket, pulled out a velvet ring box containing a real, sparkling diamond ring I had bought with my saved shop profits, and knelt down in the autumn grass. I loved you when we were 17 sitting in the frost on my truck tailgate. Case? I said, looking up into her tear-filled hazel eyes. I don't want 90 days on a cold probate document. I want 40 years under this oak tree. Marry me for real, Casey Booker. She dropped straight to her knees in the autumn grass, threw her arms around my neck, and whispered yes 3 times before I could even slide the diamond ring onto her finger. On the final official day of the 90-day window, we met at Estate Attorney Harrison's downtown office with joint utility bills, home improvement inspection reports, and signed neighbor affidavits proving active, continuous cohabitation. That was when Uncle Dale burst into the conference room alongside his corporate real estate lawyer, his face red with desperation. Stop the deed transfer, Dale shouted, slamming his hand on the mahogany table. The marriage is a fraudulent scheme. Ask Rhett Callahan what happened beside his work truck 3 weeks ago. Ask him about the cashier's check. You honestly think a blue-collar electrician turned down $60,000 in cold hard cash? Mr. Harrison frowned over his half-moon glasses, looking at Dale's corporate counsel. Is there any factual substance to this allegation? Dale's attorney looked utterly mortified, stepping back from his client. I sat on that information for 3 weeks, Case, I said softly, holding my wife's hand across the table. I hated keeping it from you, but I knew how much it would break your heart to realize what your own flesh and blood was willing to do for real estate. What did you say to him out by the truck, Rhett? Casey whispered, her eyes shining with absolute trust. Here is the exact response I gave Dale Booker beside my service truck 3 weeks earlier. I looked Uncle Dale straight in his cold eyes, spat on the gravel between his polished shoes and said, I spent 17 years too damn terrified to tell Casey Booker I loved her. I am sure as hell not going to take $60,000 of your dirty money to lose her now that I finally have her. I told him he could fold that check 4 ways and shove it where the sun don't shine, because there wasn't enough currency printed on earth to make a real man sell out the woman he wanted to spend his life with. Then I told him to get off our land before I used my iron pipe wrench to physically assist him off the property. The attorney's office fell dead silent. Dale's desperate accusation had exposed his own attempted bribery and extortion in front of an officer of the court. Dale's corporate attorney closed his briefcase with a loud snap. We're done here, Dale. We're withdrawing our contest of the deed. He walked out the door without looking back, and Dale followed him in silent, utterly humiliated defeat. Mr. Harrison stamped the final land transfer document with a heavy brass seal and handed the deed across the table to Casey. Congratulations, Mrs. Callahan. The Booker farmhouse is officially yours. When we stepped out onto the sunlit courthouse steps, Casey looked up at me with tears flowing freely down her cheeks. You turned down $60,000 cash for a salon hairdresser and an old drafty farmhouse? Best financial trade I ever made in my entire life, I said, wrapping my arms around her waist and pulling her close. Casey has had a hand-carved wooden plaque sitting over the kitchen sink ever since. Steady hands, steady heart. Turns out Gran was right about the Callahan boy all along. That is the story of how my best friend asked me to marry her for 90 days, and how telling the truth I had been too scared to speak for 17 years saved everything that mattered. If you stayed with me all the way to the end of this journey, drop a comment below and tell me what city, state, or country you are listening from tonight. And tell me honestly, how long is too long to keep your true feelings hidden from someone who matters to you? If Rhett and Casey's story warmed your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell for more deeply human stories. Take care of the ones you love out there, and don't wait 17 years to tell them. We'll see you in the next story.